In this lesson, we're going to be creating a list of our reminders and adding it to our application interface. So let's get started. First, let's open our views file. And now we want to do a little bit of cleanup. Let's change our view name. Let's change it to index because this is going to be our base view, our main index view. Let's get rid of this old flash message. We don't need that anymore. And that's much better. Okay. So next we need to import our model that we created in the previous video for our reminder. So let's go from .model, models, import reminder. And then we want to make sure there's two spaces. There we go. Next we want to add a query to our view. So the idea is that once reminders are created, we want to be able to view all of the existing reminders. So the query is going to be reminders, and we're going to make that equal to, so now we're going to query the database using the SQL Alchemy ORM, and you can do that using the model directly. So we'll go reminder.query, and we'll go all. So what this is doing is saying for the reminders table, if you're familiar with SQL, it's basically doing select all from the reminders table, which essentially means get all the reminders from the reminder table. So what we'll have after this query is run is a list of all of our reminders within this reminders variable, and then we want to return that reminders variable in our template so that we can do something with it. So we'll go down to our render template function, and we'll add a parameter. We'll go reminders is equal to reminders. There we go. Okay, so now this list of reminders should be available within our index.html template. So let's check that out next. So let's open up our index.html template, and where we put this little placeholder text, this is where the table goes. We'll get rid of that. So next we want to output the variable, the reminders variable, just to see, to make sure that it's passing the reminder objects that we're looking for. So we'll go double curly braces, and then we'll go reminders. We'll save that. Now I'll switch over to our shell. And if you haven't started your server yet, and if you haven't activated your virtual environment, make sure you do that now. So I'll start Flask run, find it externally. That looks good. And then we'll switch over to our Chrome. Okay, and there you go. You can see the two reminders that we have in our database, which it looks like the query is working. So that means that we can go ahead and start outputting those reminders in some type of fashion that is useful to the user. So let's do that. Let's switch over to our code, and in our index.html file, let's get rid of the outputted variable, and we're going to replace this with a table, and within that table we're going to output the columns for the reminder model. So let's start by defining our table. We'll give it the class table, which is a bootstrap class, which will help kind of style the table up and make it look good. And let's create some, let's create a table head. And in this table head, we're going to create some table headers, which is just going to describe each column. So the format is thscope column, and then the column name, which is going to be, the first one will be ID, and then I'm just going to make a bunch of these. So we'll go, let's see here, we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We need 6 in total. So let's just go like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we'll just replace the names. Okay, so we have one for our ID. We need one for the status of the reminder, which means either sent or not sent. We need one for our message. We need one for our send on date. We need one for our sent on date. And we need one for our option to delete the reminder. Okay. So next we're going to create the body of our table. So we'll go tbody, close that up. And then within this table body, we're going to use Jinja to output our reminder data. So the first step is we need to do some condition checking. We want to make sure that we have reminders before we attempt to output them. So we'll go if reminders, and then we'll close this block. We'll go end if. So this way, if we don't have any reminders, nothing will be output. And if we do have reminders, everything in this tag will be output. Then we want to create a for loop. The for loop is going to iterate over all of the reminders and output each reminder's data. So first we'll open some tags and we'll go for reminders, or rather for reminder in reminders. And then we'll close those tags up, which uses end for. There we go. So now every iteration of, or rather for every object in the reminders list, we'll get some type of output within this code block. So let's just test that that's working. So we'll go, we'll output, actually no, that won't work. Let's go tr td dash td and then close up the tr, and then we'll go reminder id, and then we'll save that, and then we'll switch over to our browser where we'll refresh. Okay, cool. Then you can see our table rendered, and you can see the first two IDs of our reminders. So let's switch back over to our code, and we'll fill in the rest of the columns. Add some better formatting here because we're going to have more than one column. All right, so we need 5 more for 6 total. So we'll go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So for the second column, we have the header set as status. So we'll go status. For the third one, message. Send on. Sent on. And then, actually for this one, we'll just leave this blank for now. We'll put in a non-breaking space. There we go. Okay, so let's switch over. We'll save that again, and we'll switch over to our Chrome tab, and we'll check and see, refresh and see that we're getting everything. Okay, cool. So we're getting ID, we're getting message, we're getting send on, and we're getting sent on, and then we're not getting delete or status. That's because status we haven't actually set up yet. We'll be doing that shortly. And delete, obviously, we just used a non-breaking space for that one. So next, let's fill in our status for our reminders. So we'll switch back over to our code, and we want to open up the models file. And now we don't have a column for status. What we're going to do is we're going to use a Python class property to take one of the columns that we have and determine the status off of that. So what I'll do is I'll write the property and then we'll discuss how it works. So first, use the Decorator Property. And that's going to decorate a function, and you call the function what you want the property to be named. So we'll go status. It takes one parameter, which is self, and then we're going to return a value. So the value that we return is going to be based on whether the sent on field has been set or not. So we can just use a simple if statement. So we'll go delivered if self sent on, else pending. Okay, so we've created a Python property named status, and we're returning the status delivered if we have a sent on value. Otherwise, that means it's not sent and it's still pending. So Python properties, again, is something that you should be familiar with, but if not, just briefly, a Python property will work the same way as one of these class properties, except it's a function which will return a value based off of some type of logic within this function. The only other confusing part might be self, and whenever you see the self variable within a class, that's referring to the object that's been instantiated for this class. So it's saying, for this reminder, this particular reminder, you want to use the sent on value for that object. So let's go ahead and save this, and then we're going to switch over to our Chrome tab to see that it worked. And it looks like it did. Now both of our reminders don't have sent-ons, so both of them are pending. Now if this was, if we had a sent-on date, it would evaluate that and it would return delivered as its status. Now lastly, let's add a delete action to our table. So let's switch back to our code, pull up the index file, and then within the delete column, let's create a link, and we'll make it href to just a hash because we're not going to fill in the logic for this yet, and we're going to just say delete, and then we'll save that, and then we'll switch back over. Okay, cool. You can see there's a stubbed out link for our delete action. So what we'll do later is we'll tie this to another view, which is going to be the view that handles deleting reminders. So this is looking good. Obviously we need to maybe fix it up a little bit, maybe add some styles and kind of clean up the interface. We also want to check, we want to check what happens when we don't have any reminders, and then we need to add some case checking for that. So let's switch over to our shell and shut off our server, or you can open an additional tab, whatever works for you. And I'm going to open up a Flask shell, and I'm just going to delete our existing reminders so that we can check what it looks like, what our table looks like when there are no reminders. So let's go Flask shell, check that the reminder class is there, looks good. So to delete something out of using the SQL Alchemy ORM, you take your model, you go reminder, query, and then go delete. So you can see it returned the value 2. That means 2 columns, or rather 2 rows, has been deleted. And then we'll just go, db session commit. And we'll go back to our browser. There we go. And we'll refresh. Oops, we forgot to turn back on our server. So I'll switch back over to the shell. Control D out of the Python shell, and we're just going to go like this. There we go. Turn back on our server. Switch back over to Chrome. There we go. Okay, so you can see that all the reminders were deleted, and it looks kind of bare. It doesn't really look very good. So let's add a little bit of logic, or rather, let's add some markup that'll handle the scenario where we don't have reminders. So let's switch over to our code again. Yeah, in our index file is exactly where we need to be. So we added this if reminders check. What we're going to do is we're going to extend this a little further. We're going to add an else catch in there. So we'll go change the tags. We'll go else. And then we'll add we're going to add a table row. And inside this table row, we're just going to span across all the columns and just have a message that says, you know, there's no reminders. So 1 second, there we go. So we'll go tr scope is equal to row. Then we're going to open a td column, and we want to center this column. So we're going to go text center, which is a class that's provided by Bootstrap, which will ultimately center our text. And then we're going to add a call span, which means this one column is going to span across a certain amount of columns, and we're going to make that equal to 6 because we want it to span across all of the columns. And then we'll add our message, no reminders added. So we'll close the column, close the row. We'll save that, and then we're going to switch over to our browser, and we'll refresh. And there you go. You can see our no reminders added row has been added because we have no reminders. And then when we do have reminders, that'll be replaced with the reminder data. Now, one thing I noticed back in our table is that I added the scope to our table row, which is not what we want to do. That's strictly for header rows. So we'll take that out just to keep things consistent. Now, I also noticed when we had our reminders showing that our sent on field is outputting none, which is the legitimate value for that column, but it's not very informative. It doesn't really make sense as far as a user interface goes. So why don't we fix that up? What we'll do is we'll go to our shell, and I'm going to, this time I'll open a new tab so that we don't have to stop our server. I'll clear this. There we go. So I'll open a Flask shell, and we're just going to create one reminder. So let's go reminder is equal to reminder, and we know that we need a message. So we'll give our old trusty hello world, and we know that we need a send on date, which is going to be equal to datetime, oops, time dot now. Now this is going to fail because I haven't imported the datetime module, but we'll do that here in a second. So close that up. There's our datetime is not defined, so we go import datetime, and then we'll run that back again. There we go. Okay, so we've got our reminder object. You can see it's transient. That means it's not currently committed to our database. So let's do that next. Let's go. We'll add it to our session. So db session add reminder, and then we'll commit it to our database. db session commit. Okay, so that looks like it worked. What we'll do now is we'll drop out with Control D, and then we'll switch over to our browser, and it should show the reminder in the browser. So let's see here. Okay, looks good. And yeah, you'll see the none value, which is a little bit it's a little bit not quite what we want. So let's switch over now, and we'll fix that up with something a little bit more user friendly. So we'll move over to our code, our index file, and we'll find the sent on field. Let's get rid of this variable output, and we're going to open some functional tags, and we're going to say if reminder sent on, and then we're going to close up these tags. Let's go int if, actually no, let's go else. There we go. And then we want to add some end if tags, because we're going to have two different conditions here. So we're going to go if reminder sent on, then output reminder sent on, and we'll just kind of format that a little better. There we go. And then if there's no value, we're just going to say, let's just say NA. That's something that people are used to seeing and that they're familiar with. So we'll save that, and then we'll switch over to our browser, and we'll refresh. Okay, so you can see because the change that we made, the sent on field, which is a none value or a null value, will output as NA. And then if it has a value, it'll just output that value, which will end up looking a lot like, or exactly like, the send on value, which is a datetime format. So this is looking good. The last thing I want to do is just add a little bit of styling. Our columns, or our rows rather, are kind of pushed up towards the top of our application, and we can maybe push those down and just make it look just a little bit better. So we'll switch over to our editor, and we need to create a file. So we'll create, in the static CSS folder, we're going to create a custom CSS file. We'll go new file, styles.css. And next we need to link this file into our application. So we'll go to our base template, open that up, and we'll just copy this existing link, and then we'll replace the href with our new one. So we'll go static CSS, styles.css. Then I'll just get rid of this integrity check and this cross origin property, because it's not cross origin, it's local. And then we're going to save that. Now, before I forget, before we leave our base template, we need a way to differentiate our navigation bar, our main navigation bar, from any other nav bar element that gets created in our application. Now, I don't think there's any other that we're going to be creating, but this is just good practice. So what we'll do is we'll add a class to differentiate our main navigation. So we'll go main-nav, and we'll save that. Then we'll switch over to our styles folder, or rather our styles file, and we're going to address that navigation element. So we'll go .main/ or -nav. So this is just addressing any element with the class main nav, which is only the one that we have. And what we're going to do is we're going to add some bottom margin. So we'll go margin dash bottom, and let's give it, let's say 50 pixels for now, and see how that looks. So we'll hit save for that, and then we'll switch over to our Chrome tab, and we'll restart. Okay, and you can see, or refresh rather, you can see that it pushed it down 50 pixels, which I think looks much better. It doesn't look so crowded, it doesn't look so squished up like it was previously. So last but not least, we should probably commit our progress. So let's switch over to our shell. I'm going to stop my server, clear, just so it's more readable. So let's do our typical git status, see where we're at. So we made some changes, models, base, index, views, and we created some files within the static folder. So it also added that. So let's, we want to add all of this, so let's stage it all. So we'll go git add dot, and we'll go git status. And you can see it's all been added. So now we just need to make our git commit. So git commit, and the message will just say added reminders table to main page. There we go. Yeah, and there we go. So that's it for this lesson. We created a list of our reminders. We outputted that list into our table, our newly created table, and we have it looking pretty good and set up to move forward. In our next lesson, we'll create our very first form using WT forms, and we'll use that form to create reminders in our user interface.